Good morning. So glad you all could make it to the panel on Big Pharma. We have a number of my colleagues here today, and I'm very pleased that they've been able to make it with all the competing demands in Boston. And there's a lot of experience up here. Most of the panelists have worked at least in two major big pharmas and during their career, if not also in academia and the biotech arena. And so they've got great insights into how Big Pharma works and what it takes to partner with Big Pharma, which is what I'm assuming you're all here to hear about and learn about today. So what I'd like to do for our session this morning is we'll start out with a little intro by each panelist, as well as have them talk about how their company approaches external partnering and some of the unique approaches that they've taken. Just to sort of frame us all in sort of how we're viewing and what the challenges are in innovation from the Big Pharma perspective. We were all standing outside earlier, had a short conversation about how things have changed over the past decade. Certainly since the financial crisis, much of Big Pharma had previously been doing a lot of their R&D in-house, but the financial crisis shuttered a lot of the business models, the funds around VC, some of the companies that had been funded into late-stage clinical development, and the entire industry sort of took a step back, understanding that much of the future of innovation would not necessarily come from its own R&D houses, but rather that external innovation driven by entrepreneurs, academics, and other institutions might be holding the answers to the unmet medical needs that would drive our future pipelines. So in that regard, what we've seen is that partnering has moved earlier in the development life cycle. We see a number of novel approaches towards nurturing and sponsoring early stage startups to a point where there's sufficient data for thinking about creative deal structures. And each one of these companies has taken its own unique approach to fulfill its pipeline and its strategic interests. So we'll get into that during the course of our discussion today. I'll start out with introduction of who I am, and then we'll pass it down the row here. So I'm Caroline Zimmerman. I'm a Senior Director of Transactions at the Johnson & Johnson Innovation Center in Menlo Park, California. I've been with J&J for about a year and a half now, and prior to that I'd spent 14 years with Novartis Pharmaceuticals doing mostly late-stage business development and partnering. Across a breadth of transactions of product acquisitions, managing major alliances, evaluating early stage assets, and then also deal making. My last role at Novartis was leading the BD&L efforts for the global cardiovascular and metabolic franchise. And then I was seconded to a DRX Capital that was a venture fund formed between Qualcomm and Novartis to look into digital medicine. So over that 18-month time period, we had made a number of investments in digital therapeutics and software platforms, and it really spurred my interest to move more into early stage partnering and the challenges with funding and nurturing early stage science. So that's what I do now at J&J. And what attracted me to J&J was their approach through the innovation centers. What they've done is we have 4 innovation centers spread across the globe that embed teams across our therapeutic areas and divisions to get to know the academic collaborators, the researchers, the local entrepreneurs, and work with them on opportunities that are of strategic interest to us. So under that umbrella, we have venture investing through JJDC, we have incubators through our J Labs, and at the Innovation Center, we have teams that focus on early stage partnering. So with that, let me hand it over to Christian Schubert.
Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, so Chris Schubert from External Innovation at Biogen. I guess we are the little brother amongst the big pharma partners, being a large biotech, but nonetheless, I think it's great to be in the company today. So I've been with Biogen for about 2.5 years. I was at Pfizer in R&D before that for 4 years here in Kendall Square in neuroscience and pain, where I was part of obviously R&D programs, but also our portfolio augmenting, portfolio enhancement team, which was really a scientist-driven external innovation model where we thought about having an organization-wide radar to bring in new exciting science. And then I joined Biogen about 2.5 years ago, first in the corporate strategy group, and then until recently I headed up the search and evaluation group within business development and external innovation. And I've moved most recently into managing more of our early venture and fund investments. So I currently manage and advise 3 of our fund-of-fund investments, one in Israel, one focused on the US and UK, and then one focused on dementia discovery together with SV Life Sciences. Biogen, as you might have heard, is in the middle of redefining itself into a neuroscience company. Earlier this year, we spun off our blood disorder business, and we still carry on a number of immunology and autoimmune disease clinical stage programs, but we don't do any research in that area anymore. But we have really aspirations to become the world leader in neuroscience, mostly because we think the world needs a leader in neuroscience, as the news of Axovant's failure in phase 3 in Alzheimer's disease this morning certainly proved. So the company is currently focused in the core and neurodegeneration. We have a strong pipeline, obviously, and products in multiple sclerosis, both in inflammatory as well as progressive, with a focus on neurodegeneration and repair. We're building out that pipeline around our phase 3 asset, aducanumab, for Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. We're very interested in movement disorders, like Parkinson's disease and ataxias. And lastly, we have big efforts around neuroimmunology. We have certain growth areas where we're in particular looking to partner, which include acute neurology, traumatic brain injury, stroke, spinal cord injury, pain and sensory disorders. We have a number of assets in the pipeline where we're always looking for new ones there. We are trying to get into neuropsychiatry, although that, a very redefined view of psychiatry, and we can go into that later. And then lastly, we have a strong interest in back of the eye ophthalmology and retinal disease in particular. And in fact, we are actually the biggest gene therapy company in inherited retinal dystrophies. We have 7 programs currently that are in the portfolio. Stage-wise, we're looking to partner around lead ID, lead optimization through phase 2 POC, largely because we have a pipeline to build. So our ideal focus currently in the near term over the next 12 to 24 months is certainly early to mid-clinical, but we're always happy to take a look at earlier preclinical programs. And in terms of real early innovation, I think as Carolyn said, we don't have a prescribed deal model. We'd like to do deals that make both partners happy, and certainly are open to exploring novel and creative models of innovation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Liz Levier. I'm the head of Boston Innovation Hub for Merck. The Boston Innovation Hub is a business development and licensing team based here in Boston, Cambridge area. Our headquarters of Merck is in New Jersey. It was about 3 years ago that it was decided that we should form these innovation hubs very similar to other pharma companies, where we have 4 innovation hubs throughout the world. Boston was the first to be built, given the concentration and cluster of academia, hospitals, and biotech in this space. We also have a site in San Francisco, a site in London, and a site in Shanghai. We are really looking for opportunities for partnering, investment, acquisition in the early early preclinical space all the way through proof of concept in the clinic. In this space, we look at primarily not just the R&D focus that Merck has internally, which is oncology, neuroscience, cardiovascular, metabolism, infectious disease, immunology, but really in any space that has an unmet medical need. We are opportunistic, and one of the reasons for us being here in business development licensing is to get to know the space, get to know where Merck should be if we're not already in that space. And so we are really open to seeing any therapeutic opportunity that does meet a clear unmet medical need. Our team is focused in different therapeutic areas, so the team that's here in Cambridge each have knowledge of what the therapeutic area is actively doing internally so that they can easily see synergy with external collaboration and where things may fit. So I've been at Merck for 3 years, so when at the inception of the Boston Innovation Hub. Prior to that, I was at Novartis for 9 years doing business development licensing there, also in the early preclinical through proof of concept in the clinic space. And prior to Novartis, I was in scientific positions at smaller companies.
Good morning. I'm Nick Pullen. I currently work for Roche. I've taken on a position to help support their external innovation aspirations in the Boston-Cambridge area. I've worked with them for 3 months. So I'm very much new to this, so bear with me. I had 18 years at Pfizer, 12 of them in the UK, which is where I was born, and the last 6 based here in Cambridge. And I worked very much in the early space, from idea out to clinical proof of concept. And I suppose that is my specialty. And as is clear from the first 3 speakers on the panel, what you can sense is many large pharma are looking to invest earlier and earlier and earlier, partly because we don't have all of the expertise and capability in every new breaking area of science, and also because the costs of doing business later on are now getting so prohibitively large that we need to go earlier and earlier and earlier. And so in order to support that, they need people that have got a track record in drug discovery, drug hunting, and so that's the reason why they brought me in. So a relatively small team looking to grow, as is the case. We have a large shopping list of interests. Certain areas are currently out of scope in terms of, I suppose, investment areas. The company made a decision a few years ago to exit cardiovascular and metabolic disease. The reasons for that are not entirely clear to me, but nonetheless it was a decision that they made in order for them to focus on some of those key areas that are more important. And those key areas really are within the inflammation and immunology area, large interests in gastroenterology and rheumatology that sits within that. Many large companies have got very similar interests. But also within neuroscience, ophthalmology and rare diseases spaces as well. Again, very similar to many of the other large companies. I think what differentiates Roche in terms of its approach is the deep science that it has as a company. The thing that really attracted me to want to work with them is the quality of the insights that scientists have. So in trying to find the right sort of partners that are both agile with respect to the development campaign, but also that really understand what you're trying to do, I think you find a very good partner in Roche. So looking forward to the discussion this morning with everybody, and hope I can provide some useful insights.
Good morning. My name is Mark Nuttall. I head immunology and multiple sclerosis, business development and licensing at Sanofi. This is my 4th big pharma. I started off as a postdoc at AstraZeneca, went to GSK for a few years, started off as research labs, then in project management, then in business development. And then I went to J&J, was at J&J for 10 years in immunology business development to begin with, and then I led neuroscience business development for 5 years. I've been at Sanofi for a year. As I say, we're concentrating in 2 areas, immunology and multiple sclerosis. These are 2 really important areas for Sanofi. So in immunology, we've just launched Kevzara, the IL-6 antibody for RA. And also we've just launched Dupixent, the IL-4/13 antibody for atopic dermatitis. So these are 2 very important products for us, both biologics, and what really my remit is to fill that pipeline behind these 2 important biologics. And we're also agnostic to the stage of development. In fact, the 2 deals we've done in immunology and MS this year have both been pretty early deals, one with Immunex for their anti-CD40 ligand antibody, which is a very promising pathway that's been untapped so far in immunology. And then the other deal that we did this year was the Ablynx deal, which was a platform deal, where Ablynx are going to create 8 biospecific nanobodies for us in the fields of immunology and MS, and we're going to use those as kind of a new frontier, if you like, in kind of biologics approaches, where we believe hitting 2 targets at once may be superior to hitting 1 single molecular target. In terms of the multiple sclerosis business, we have Aubagio and Lemtrada, 2 very important products for Sanofi. In fact, MS is the fastest growing franchise within Sanofi. And again, my job and my responsibility is to fill the pipeline behind these 2 important products and compete with other great companies like Biogen in the MS space and make a success of this. So again, I lead the whole kind of soup to nuts business development there. It's from start to finish. We're looking for marketing products, we're looking for mid-stage clinical compounds, we're looking for early stage. We're also looking for transformative platform deals as well.
Great, thank you. So just before we start the discussion, we'd like to keep the panel interactive. So if you have questions of broad interest, please catch my attention. Let's bring them into the discussion. And we'll certainly end before our time is up so that you can come up and meet the panel and hopefully start that discussion that leads to the next deal. So with that, to my panelists, I'm going to start picking on you and tossing some questions out there. It's great to have such experience at the table, and please, chime in, but we'll try to mix it up a bit and get some fresh perspectives. So Elizabeth, I'm going to pick on you first, starting. So big pharmas are complex organizations. How can early stage partners begin to stand in your shoes and understand your perspectives and what you're looking for and what you need in order to get started?
I guess one piece of advice that I give some of the early companies is try to talk to as many big pharma as possible, but also do your research on what areas of focus that pharma company has before you contact them, just to get to know, even though we're opportunistic, it's always easier to do something that's within strategic focus, right? As far as partnering, especially in the very early space, because those are where you see the most synergy. You have internal research and development folks who can bring something to the table to help an early company really bring the technology or product forward much quicker. So those are, especially in the early space, those are the easier sells, right? Because we really serve as, we're looking for opportunities, but we serve as the kind of agent within the company to sell opportunities and really say, this is where we should be, this is why. So as much data and just rationale for why this meets an unmet medical need, a rationale for why invest in this, and also pointing out what is the standard of care today and what the problem is that you're trying to solve. So that helps us with bringing it forward to the next stage. I think as far as big companies, we're very fortunate that even though we're a large company, it's very easy once you get that you find that opportunity to get something approved. It's one committee you go to and you just say, here's what it is. You get scientific approval. Here's how much we want to pay for it. This is the structure, and that's really it. There's not this big bureaucratic process. So it really is finding that right opportunity, and once we see it, we know it, and we drive forward to our committee.
Mark, is getting traction at Sanofi any different?
I think it's a good question. I think that, so coming from J&J, where we had kind of, a committed environment such as the innovation centers, where we focused on early platforms, spin-outs, harnessing academic IP, it seemed in some ways kind of easier. I think Sanofi's heading more in that direction. We don't have these innovation centers, we don't have dedicated J labs, we don't have early kind of platform, if you like, spaces. I think, a lot of companies like Merck and others are doing that now. I think it's a good idea to do that. I think one of the I guess challenges in Sanofi is that you want to get to the right people, which might be, I don't know whether it's more difficult or not in Sanofi than it is with companies that have dedicated kind of innovation centers. But again, just to illustrate, it can happen because we've done 2 pretty early stage deals today. So I think it's important to get to the right people, and that's kind of partly why we're here today as well, so we can connect you to the right people. With the absence of venture funds over the last few years, I think it's, and also the realization that big pharma did not do early stuff very well. I think the vision of creating these innovation centers, I think, was very strong, and is hopefully going to bear a lot of fruit in the future. So, again, I think big pharma are going earlier and earlier, and I think all companies should harness that kind of position.
Great. Let me ask Nick. Nick, how does Roche go about sourcing early stage opportunities, both the ones that fit the stated strategy or ones that fit adjacencies / that are opportunistic? I mean, where do you go to find great science?
Well, there's several ways I suppose one can answer that question. As is the case for many large companies, they have scouting and evaluation teams that work out of BD departments. They tend to be a handful of individuals that are spread very, very thinly across the globe, trying to do as much as they possibly can, managing emails and propositions from the outside world. And I think they do a pretty good job, but they probably source a fraction of the opportunities that are out there. I think probably the most useful, at least in the area that I've been involved in, is the interactions that scientists have with the community. They meet investigators at meetings and conferences. They publish data that then becomes a beacon for others to be attracted towards. So those are sort of two ways in which one enables those sorts of contacts. I think other companies are probably better in terms of building a kind of footprint and a beacon for the rest of the world. So the sorts of things, for instance, that Merck and J&J have done in terms of building these enterprises that sit outside of the companies. So for instance, when I was in Pfizer, the Centers for Therapeutic Innovation, this model, CTI model, which was built as an interface with the academic community trying to develop early phase investment and drug discovery programs, I think it gave people an opportunity to outlet their ideas. And so seeding, enterprise that really helps to deliver new therapies for patients in a way which was very, very different, I think, from convention. So I think increasingly we need to try and find ways of marketing ourselves in different ways that enable groups to be attracted to want to work with us. So Roche, I think, are still a little bit behind the curve, might I say, but they're trying to play catch up with some of the folk that have been making very large investments in this area.
So Christian, you're a Boston headquartered company. How does Biogen go about?
Yeah, I think I second Nick. I think the organization-wide radar, which I mentioned earlier, is certainly the best and biggest source of innovation we have. I think a good example is we developed Tecfidera, right, which is DMF, which happens to be a metabolic intermediate of the Krebs cycle, but is also a furniture flame retardant and has no drug-like properties whatsoever. So I think that took some conviction and deep understanding of the biology to give that a shot, and that certainly came from an internal understanding and a decade or so of doing MS drug discovery and development. But we have a search and evaluation group which is small and nimble and as Nick said is stretched pretty thin, and they try to manage as much of the incoming traffic as they can. But we work very actively with our R&D stakeholders in developing strategies around what portfolio across what stage and modality do they actually want to build, and what do we want to do in-house versus externally, and then we in a very targeted way, focused way, we go out and try to find these opportunities. As I mentioned, we currently have a focus sort of around IND through phase 2 POC, simply because we want to build a fivefold larger pipeline in neuroscience that we currently have by 2021. So we're looking very actively in that mid to late stage clinical space. But for early innovation, we're open to a lot of different ideas. We go out and we introduce ourselves, and if there's anything interesting in neuroscience, come talk to us. We are focused on trying to understand early on, how the science, and it all starts with the right target for us, and thinking about, how do you think about target validation, and why is this the right target, and how can you then ultimately translate this target into the right patient population at the right time with the right modality. So we're modality agnostic. But we think, obviously, early on, how to marry an unmet medical need with a clinical development plan, because we're not afraid to go into the clinic early and often, but if we fail, we want to fail early. We want to fail in a nimble way. So we put a lot of emphasis onto human data. Ideally, we'd like to start with human genetically validated target wherever possible, and we'd like to have a plan how you can measure biomarker or pharmacodynamic biomarkers in a phase 1b or a phase 2a study to achieve proof of concept in the clinic early. I should say, right now, we don't fund science experiments per se. We fund drug discovery programs, but we've made some investments into other entities, such as the Harrington Project, run out of Cleveland University hospitals, or the Israel Biotech Fund to get access to the emerging Israel biotech scene, or the Dementia Discovery Fund. We work a lot with the local VC community, and trying to broaden a lot of the VC partnerships actually away from just the Boston hub into some other emerging hubs across the globe. And I think for us it all starts with a strategy, knowing what you want to do before we can decide how we're going to go about it. And I think the how, we don't have a prescribed transactions model. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's really, we want to do what makes sense, but also what gets us to a human clinical proof of concept experiment pretty quickly.
And Carolyn, I have one other answer that recently I found that when you asked the question of how we source opportunities, I actually found that given that we're in the Cambridge-Boston network, there's a lot of opportunities for us to get involved early on, no strings attached, and really get to know the innovation. I think programs like Mass Connect and having our team members volunteering their time for Mass Connect and mentoring new companies that are up and running and trying to be formed it doesn't have a contractual obligation. It's informal mentoring, and you get to know what's coming and what's next in the new startups. Informal relationships with the Levotnick Accelerator, for example, with Harvard, and giving them feedback on where they should potentially put their grants in for further research and bringing the science to another level. Programs, even I participated earlier this year in a program that the Broad Institute and Harvard and MIT pulled together, which is actually training postdocs and MD students how to spin off companies. And so you get to hear their ideas and what we've been working on in the lab, and how do you do that. And through those mentoring relationships, which are something we can just do as part of the community and helping, you get to see some more innovation and new things that are coming out of some of the academic labs.
I'll compliment that because I'll bring a West Coast perspective. The tech industry has been great at these incubators, but it's very different for biotech. And quite often we're seeing a lot of academics or ideas coming out of research institutes where they're not quite ready to partner but need to generate data. And there's now a prolific number of incubators that make space available at reasonable costs so companies don't have to undergo dilutive funding or look to pharma to fund, but can actually progress the idea to a later stage when they have more evidence and can be in a better bargaining position at the table. I think that's good for pharma. The deal values might go up, but I think you're also at a point where you've de-risked a little bit of the early stage science to a point where it's certainly attractive. And I know there's IndieBio, there's certainly Johnson & Johnson's J Labs that all operate under a no strings attached model. Mark, let me ask you a question. How do you weigh the importance of the team versus the technology, thinking about what kind of data do you want before you're thinking about either funding a company, partnering, or even doing investment? And, what's too early, what's too late?
That's a good question. We certainly do put value on the people. I was involved in an acquisition a couple of years ago where, we thought a significant value of the company was in the 2 or 3 senior management. And we didn't want those to leave, so it was an acquisition with an earn-out. So they were incentivized to stay for 2 or 3 years and while we progressed the compounds in-house once we acquired the company. So it's definitely a blend. I mean, obviously, it comes down to the compounds, but if you've got really good quality senior management, I think also they can figure out a lot of things that perhaps the big pharma, where it sometimes get absorbed into a big pharma, perhaps it would be better to retain the management and still have them kind of driving that project. So I think that answers your question. I think there's, we're always, particularly in acquisitions, I think that's important because you don't want to lose those people, you don't want to lose that history, that insight. So I think it does matter, and I think also the whole dynamic when you go to diligence and you interact with the management and you interact with the scientists and the commercial folk, that leaves a huge impression on the team, and it also kind of, it really does affect, I think, your decision making, quite frankly, around, if you have multiple assets against the same molecular target, you can certainly be influenced by the quality of the people that have driven that program so far and been successful. So I think the answer is definitely there is value there. And actually with the example I gave about the staged acquisition, there was real value. We thought that it was a significant kind of 15% value of the company. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Anyone else have a perspective on that one?
I think the team makes a huge difference, especially when it's an early stage company, where they're just getting going. Showing that there's management that's done it before, either through another company or experience with drug development at a larger company, and has that years of experience, I think makes our job easier when selling that opportunity internally. But just to show how the question about what stage, we 2 years ago invested in a company that had 3 folks in their management team, an idea, no IP, no labs. And they came to us with this idea, and it just struck a chord with what we needed. and we knew the experience of the team and knew that if anyone was going to solve the problem, they were going to solve the problem. And so we invested and actually formed a collaboration as well to help them get there faster. And so, I mean, it can't get any earlier than that. And so we led a Series A round of financing for them, along with our venture partners and others. That ended up kind of, I think, with us, with the name being in there, it attracted the rest of the syndicate for the Series A. So it's an example of it can be that early, and that's where the importance of the team, made a big difference.
It sounds like there's also two elements to that, right? It's one of having either certain big pharma experience or entrepreneurship experience of what you're going to face, the need to pivot. But then another point Mark made was about the scientific expertise and the core competence. So it seems like it's a combination that really is what drives sort of confidence around the ability to execute and pursue that idea. So I keep scanning the audience. If I've missed anybody's questions, you might need to catch my attention a little more aggressively. Yes?
So I'm curious, a lot of the VCs out there have almost kind of a submit your idea or business plan and we'll take a look at it. Do any of your company, for instance, I don't know if it's a RESI characteristic, but in your bios, in everyone's bios, there's no contact information. So if I wanted to submit an idea, I guess I have to get your business card, of course, but,
Yep.
but do you have an analogous kind of a website where someone with an idea that thinks it can fit into your...
And Merck.com, all of our pictures and names and email addresses are there,
Okay.
by location, all the different hubs, and also has a more generic submission, but it has our names and who we are.
Maybe I'll address it in this manner. Each one of us has certain functions and expertise. We're not universally broad, and so depending on what therapeutic area, what stage, there's going to be somebody in our organizations that has that on their plate as their responsibility. So I think those avenues through our websites, and certainly J&J has a similar website. My mug is up there. Trying to connect you to the right person in the organization from the onset. So those automated systems can help. I think quite often, you might be better served to, my personal opinion, you might be better served to network with the right person. I think the turnaround time will be interesting, and frankly, from my perspective, it's more of a two-way dialogue. Inherently, the questions of when is it right for us? What are we looking for? What kind of data that we're looking for? What do we perceive as the bar in that therapeutic area and the unmet need? I think are important conversations for entrepreneurs to understand. So that's my perspective. Does anybody else on the panel?
From what I hear from everybody is how difficult it is to connect with the right people in a company. And you can be in a company for 5 minutes and then move to a different part of the business, and a connection that once was is then lost. I think the nature of individuals marketing themselves and their ideas to companies is something that has to be done continually. That an opinion that is given on anything is a snapshot in time, and that can change on a sixpence. And then equally, I think the large companies also need to market themselves and be aware that they have as it were, a duty of care to the community to make sure that information is available to them, that either specific topics or other ways in which one could connect are enabled. And I don't think we do a particularly good job of it. While the websites are one way to do it, the personal contacts are obviously the easiest and most intimate way to do it. We need to do more of this.
Yeah, we don't do a good job of it. Like, it shouldn't be that difficult, should it? Because we are all networked. But I don't know, we've thought about it long and hard, but for some reason we don't do a good job of that.
I think Caroline's right, that for example, if you contact me and your company is in a particular therapeutic area at a particular location, I will try to find for you the right person within Merck. I might not be the right person, but we'll find you the right person, because everyone has their area of expertise and area of responsibility. And so it's getting you to that person as soon as possible, so that person can then give you the insight into, this is what I need to see, or this actually does check all the boxes, let's have a further conversation and go into confidentiality, etc.
And I think it's important to realize that it's a two-way street, right? For those individuals who have that responsibility, they're expected to know everybody who's working in the space, where the program is, what the data is. So it's a two-way exchange of both finding out the right person and the interest level and the feedback, and for that individual to also understand what opportunities are being pursued. Nick, you brought up a statement here that I want to drill into right now. We've all been in the position of having to say, no, not now. But no, not now has so many different flavors of not right now, maybe when you have more data, no, it's out of strategy. Can you kind of take us through your thoughts when communicating with a company that now is not the time to engage? What can they expect in terms of the type of answer? How do you try to communicate that? Because it seems like until it's partnered, there's a reason for continuing dialogue.
This is one of the most difficult things. And I was here bright and early this morning, and I already had 2 conversations with people. Really, really exciting, interesting science. And the question that's in the back of my head is it in scope or is it out of scope with where Roche currently are at the moment? And while I might think it's fabulous science and is investable, there may be other parts of the business that feel it's not right for a whole host of different reasons. And I suppose it's really quite important to understand what those reasons are, because things do change. And when they change, it can be quite dramatic. I'll give you a perfect example. When I was in Pfizer, I was based in Sandwich for many, many years, and the organisation made a decision to close the site down. And some clever people decided to take some of the innovations that they'd been working on to set up smaller companies off the back of it. And they were allowed to leave with those assets, and those companies ended up being bought by Novartis or somebody else at a very, very large amount of money. And it caused some consternation within the organisation because clearly it was not investable at the time that the companies were spun out, but it was investable enough by another company to actually want to purchase them. It's just a fact of life, right? That at the time it wasn't an area for focus, it wasn't an area of priority. There were other things that were more pressing for one reason or another, and things do change. And I think for any investor and any person that is looking for investment to try and understand the circumstances of now, I think are really, really important. And the more that we can be to be honest around that discussion, which is, it's currently not in scope for these reasons, but please, the door is always open. Come back to me as the program progresses, or if you see a different way in which we can work together, accepting these risks or accepting where we find ourselves, then I think it's a way in which you maintain dialogue. So rarely, I think, nowadays, is there not an investable idea where the door is really firmly closed. Very, very rarely. I think people are extremely creative and their ideas are often very, very sound. It's just that we have to make decisions on some of those areas that we choose to invest in compared with others. And the more you can do to market those ideas continually, the more likely you find somebody that you can actually work with that sees you and your ideas and wants to take them forward. I can understand it's a challenge, but I think perseverance always pays off. And even for ideas that once were out of scope often find a value driver somewhere along the line.
So a question?
Yeah, thanks. Andrew Holman. I'm a rheumatologist from Seattle, and I work in a space that's not recognized by whom yet, called immunoautonomics, where the autonomic nervous system affects immune responses. Stress affects the expression of disease and treatment responses. Here's a question more from a big pharma point of view. We don't have companion diagnostics in rheumatology. I've been the FDA talking about this kind of stuff. Of course, it's standard in oncology. And we're still trying to find the right drug for the right person, whether it's MS or RA or lupus, right? But what's coming is fast fail strategies and diagnostics that identify subsets of populations within MS and rheumatoid arthritis, that's leading the way, that can enrich a clinical trial. So is rheumatology or immunology or the neurologists working on MS, are they giving any thought to that kind of strategic approach to developing a drug like the cancer drugs? where we don't need to get the entire market, but we really want to find a drug that works very well in this space, whether someone has a certain autonomic profile or whatever. Because some of those studies are actually bubbling to the surface. Is that something that big companies are even thinking about, or are you still just trying to find the best drug for them?
I think we're all bobbing our heads in agreement.
Yeah, I mean,
Martin?
particularly in areas like rheumatoid arthritis, where, I think there's, maybe 10 biologics out there. We'd love to get a stratification of the patient population and really focus on a core area. So, absolutely. And Roche, I don't think Roche take any compound into clinical development without a diagnostic, is that right? Or maybe that's the position, but no, absolutely. So, particularly in areas like RA and MS, I think is something that we would be very interested in taking a look at.
Let me follow that up though. What if the technology identifies a state within the patient that affects the disease expression, and it raises all ships simultaneously? So if you improve autonomic state in the patient taking Enbrel, you increase the response rate dramatically. That's been the ACR. Same thing happens with adalimumab. Now we're moving on to MS. That makes the playing field even for all the pharmaceutical companies, and it doesn't help them tell me to use their drug instead of the other drug. The strategy is to control this confounding factor that affects the expression of disease. Have you ever given that any thought, and how scary is that for your company to deal with, since it doesn't give you a competitive advantage? But it does enrich your study if you decide to do a study and you want to get better outcomes. Well, not doing 2 out 2s.
Well, I think anything that helps us understand who the right patient is and how to enrich the study is going to be important. I'll give you my perspective. If it's going to be out there anyway, I'd rather be first. So I think, but you are dealing with disruption, right? And so also at what point is the approach been validated? So I think those to me is, you're asking a very broad question, so I'll give you a broad approach answer. I don't know if my colleagues want to chime in on that one.
I've got a couple of other, I suppose, viewpoints. The first one is technology, right? So for oncology, a needle biopsy coupled with a genetic test, coupled with a whole range of other diagnostic and pathology tests, has become standard of care. Revolutionary, really, compared with where we were 30, 50 years ago. We still don't have the same for Crohn's disease or lupus or anything else. We've got very, very crude measures for defining patient stratification. But I think with the advent of single-cell sequencing and a whole range of other biomarkers, it's going to be possible to better code patients with respect to the disease presentation at that time. What we haven't done a particularly good job at across all the disease areas is how to track patients having had some therapeutic intervention, because disease changes and we don't keep pace with what's actually happening. So what are the reasons for a TNF non-responder that once was a responder? How does the disease change with time? And I think what companies are going to be looking at in the future is the life cycle of disease management, both at the level of electronic healthcare records, but also in terms of some of these manifest phenotypes, for the lifetime of the patient rather than any one particular point in time. And I think it's going to require very, very sophisticated management of big data and algorithms that haven't been defined yet. And of course, the whole time you've got this umbrella of technology that's bringing to bear and how we use that to the greatest of effect so that we do understand the patient experience as much as possible. I don't know whether that answers your question in any way.
Well, we are now quarter till, so what I'd like to do is actually wrap up so that maybe you can come up here and talk to some of the panelists yourselves, and we give everyone a chance to meet and greet the group here. I want to thank the entire panel here. I think it's been a great discussion. Thank you for making your time in the middle of a very busy week here in Boston, and thanks to the audience as well.